I can remember like thinking in my head how I'll feel or what I'll say when I win my first Michelin star and then my second and then my third.
It's very funny because it's a blue collar job, but then again, it's not like other blue collar jobs, because when you sign up, you're like doing your timestamps, you want to do the hours, you want to do the extra hours because they're paid more. And compared to that, our blue collar job of sorts is completely the opposite of that. Those rules of the game don't exist.
We're just cooking someone's dinner at the end of the day, and it's all the stress and all the worry that you put on yourself and stuff. I'm like, it doesn't need to be this tough, it doesn't need to be this difficult on myself. And he said, oh, you're going to open a restaurant? And I just immediately like, no. And he was like, really? And I was like, no. I was like, I want to shut the shop at 5, pull the roller shutters down at 5, and I want to be home for 5:30 to see my wife and the cats.
So, hello and welcome everyone to a new episode of Fugitive Chefs podcast. As you know, this podcast covers stories of chefs who have left the industry, which is restaurants, and who are now working much beyond just culinary food service. And how do they transition to those jobs? On this episode, we have Chef Josh Whitehead. So first of all, welcome, Josh. Thank you for accepting this invitation.
Thanks very much for having me.
And what I wanted to be very frank is that Josh's profile came up because when I was planning to relaunch the season 2, the person who's the virtual character which is connected me to Josh is the AI. Because I looked up, I put a guest list of the people I had in season 1, the kind of people I want to have in season 2, and I said, who am I leaving out? Like, what other profile is out there which I'm not covering, who could be, as we call them, the fugitive chefs? And it led me to 2 articles. One, I think, which spoke about, Josh will tell us more about it, but Josh has recently left, late last year, left the restaurant industry, and today runs a pie company. So this episode, we're going to cover why did Josh end up here? How did he end up here? And how the whole process has been. So first of all, Josh, if you could just tell us, like, as somebody growing up, how did you end up in the industry? Like, what caught your eyes? Why did you first enter and think you want to be into food service or chef?
I'm not really I've been asked that before, and I'm not really sure if there was like one, finite thing that got me into it. A lot of people will be, I grew up with, my grandma or my mother like cooking in the kitchen, and I was helping out. But I never really had that. My mum's repertoire was, it wasn't particularly big or anything like that. But I think there was obviously something that drew me to it. The first thing I can remember was Gordon Ramsay's The F Word. I can remember watching that on TV, and I can't remember what he was making in this particular episode. But I was like, right, I'm gonna ring that. So I rang up my stepdad at the time, and I was like, oh, could you just get me a couple of bits from the shop on your way home? He was like, yeah, what do you need? And I started like listing off 45 items, shopping list, and he was like, oh, for God's sake or something. But it was always something, whether it was obvious or not, that was just a bit of a constant in my life, always cooking and always doing things like that until you get to that point in high school where you're like, I should probably think about what I should be doing next. And then that seemed glaringly obvious then. So I just ran with it.
And how old were you when the story narrating, how old are you at that point?
Oh, well, the Gordon Ramsay thing, I reckon I was probably 12, maybe.
Okay.
Maybe 12.
And back then, apart from that, what other career was in your mind? Like, what if not this, where would you have been?
Honestly, nothing. Yeah,
okay.
Honestly, nothing. And I think in my life, I've thought about doing. I can remember thinking of 2 other careers to have. One of them was a butcher, which is like kind of seems like a cop out because it's pretty close to cooking. And the other one was to be a travel agent, because someone told me they got like loads of free air miles and stuff. So I was like, oh, so I could go traveling for free. But other than that, I've not thought about doing anything else, to be honest with you.
No, love it. The idea that, I've spoken to enough chefs. I think the ones I think there are very few left back like now who say that, my grandmother used to cook it and I was swinging by her kitchen and then I smelled this tomato sauce reducing and I said I want to be a chef. So I love the crude reality of your like F word inspiring you to be a chef. Or
Yeah.
like at least giving you the push to, what, I can actually cook, or I should ask this 45
Yeah,
ingredients
I
from
think
from a pot.
yeah, exactly. I think it planted the seeds,
Uh-huh.
and those stories of like, growing up with my grandmother or, my dad used to grow all the vegetables in the garden and stuff. I wish I had those stories, I think,
Uh-huh.
I wish it was, my elderly grandma and, whoever that got me into cooking rather than Channel 4 and Gordon Ramsay. But, you know, you play with the cards you dealt.
And like talking about your evolution, like if you had to like just take a rocket from the moment you saw F word, thought of, passing out high school, I have to take up a career, let could be being a cook, to what you do today. How would you say have you evolved? Like what kind of, I don't know, what kind of mirrors have broken for you, or what kind of misconceptions have left your mind? How do you see your role as a chef? Is it, how far is it from what you first thought getting in?
think I think from what I wanted to do, or what I certainly thought I wanted to do, I think it's changed massively. What I get pleasure out of now and what I find fulfilling now and what I'm interested in now is, it's quite a bit different to what it was when I was, a lot younger. Like I can remember walking for the bus once, and I
Uh-huh.
can remember like thinking in my head how I'll feel or what I'll do or what I'll say when I win my first Michelin star and then my
Okay.
second and then my third. And it was all of those kind of things, around fine dining, Michelin restaurants and stuff like that, that I thought that's what I was into. But then, like, certainly in the last, like, I'd say 5 or 6 years or whatever, probably less, that I've thought that it's almost like when you become a chef, that's what you think is that's what you do. That's like what's expected of you, and that's like, the pedestal that you almost put it on. That's all that you're aiming for, and if you're not working towards that, then there's not really a lot of point. But then as I've gotten older, I've realised that not only is the Michelin and all the shiny stuff, that's not only is that not the be all and end all, but it's not even that, it's just one road that you can go down adjacent to 10,000 other roads that you could go down, I d- it, there was, I mean, funnily enough, he's a three Michelin star chef, which actually I believe but I'd specifically remember Rene Redzepi saying on a video or a film or something was before. I can't remember what it was for, but I think it had something to do with the Saturday night projects and when he was saying what it's about, and it's about, showcasing something that you're interested in or that you're working on. But he was talking about like what makes you happy through cooking. And I remember him saying something like, whether that's putting a lot of caviar and truffles on something in a three Michelin star restaurant, whether that's, smoking brisket or whether that's making a beef stew, you've got to really like lean into the thing that makes you the happiest. And, I knew what he meant when he said it, but that was quite a long time ago that I heard him say it. Whereas now I very much understand what he means now, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
You
no,
know?
totally, totally. I think a lot of what you've shared. I mean, having been in the same, yeah, I don't know if dilemma or in the same kind of questions when you're first starting off. Like when you say this now about like, yeah, thinking in your head, kind of like what kind of victory speech would you give when you reach these stages of accomplishment? I mean, I've been one
Yeah,
of them. I've been a person. I think when I started culinary school, I was 15. So yeah, back then, 16, I must have been like looking up on Google, Wikipedia, youngest three Michelin star chef or youngest guy to win Bocuse d'Or, and all these things,
yeah.
and aspiring for that and thinking like, oh, I have to do it before 27. I'm gonna make it happen. And I mean, it is a competitive field. There are not many careers out there where, I mean, it's very funny because it is a blue collar job, but then again, it's not like other blue collar jobs, because when you sign up for
Agreed.
blue collar jobs, you're like doing your timestamps, you want to do the hours, you want to do the extra hours because they're paid more. And compared to that, our blue collar job of sorts is completely the opposite of that. Those rules of the game don't exist. And I think the show business has contributed to a lot of getting this recognition part of it. And so, yeah, it's very, very interesting to hear from you how that transitioned. But my question
Yeah.
to you would be, this transition in your mind, how you see it today, did it happen because, I mean, it can be a little bit of both. That's, I mean, in my head, I think that's what the answer I would give if I was asked this question. But I would like to know from you what played more the part in this transition. Is it that when you were in these restaurants and you saw them from the inside and you understood more the core of these words or these accolades, or actually what serving or what loving what you want to serve means? Was it that, like, your understanding of the industry, or was it simultaneously also the industry changing very fast? Like, I think the way these things were looked before are not looked at the same way today because of how many of them are being questioned on the basis these stars are given, or if all the efforts behind are seen, or if it's fair, the standards you judge. Like, something so creative, can you really put that on a comparative basis and make it a mathematic game rather than an artistic game? So was it the transition of the industry, or was it your understanding of the deeper you get, the more you see of behind those curtains, how behind the glory there's a lot of behind the overnight success there's a lot of nights of, yeah, just suffering?
Yeah, I think it's probably a mixture of both. And it wasn't, I don't think it was something that happened, well, not certainly overnight, but not even something that happened, in a short space of time. I think it was sort of like, it's a bit of like an evolution, and sort of
Hmm.
understanding my mind frame around it only sort of made sense as I sort of, touched more into my mental health as I got older, because there's a few stages and a few opportunities in my life where I could have made the leap and, like, really jumped into that world, like move city and go work at this Michelin restaurant, or go do this, go do that. There was offers there, but for one reason or another, I didn't do them. Like, one, for example, was, I'd have to move to Birmingham. It was, I had a girlfriend in Leeds at the time that couldn't move, so I stayed because of that, and obviously at the time I was, a bit like resentful about it or whatever, but as I've got older, I can appreciate more that, things probably do happen for a reason, and you are probably on a bit of a trajectory. So upon reflection, I'm like, maybe that wasn't my time, and I don't think it was. Or maybe it was, but if I did that, I might be in a different position to that I am now. But then also, like you say, seeing behind the curtain, there's different arguments that can be made by different people for it. But I think for me, obviously, being in behind the scenes of places like that, you can learn so much. But
Yeah.
just for me, and this is just for me personally, I think I'm a bit more impatient. Like, I need a little bit more reward for the amount of work that I put in. And maybe it's not even so much that, maybe it's just that. So, like, I've got pretty bad attention deficit. I'm pretty ADHD. So
Hmm.
I'm constantly like trying to, absorb this and do this and do this and do this. So I don't actually think that, one, two, certainly two and three Michelin star restaurants, they're not the right fit for me personally. And it's only really probably in the last 5 or 6 years or something that I've truly acknowledged that. And then I've got friends that have won their own Michelin stars. I've got friends that work in Michelin star restaurants, and like many of us, I quite often play the comparison game, and that doesn't do you any favors. But it wasn't until that I fully realized what it is that I'm interested in and what I really like to do, that I then realized none of that matters, none of it matters,
Yeah.
and like you say, seeing how the industry changes, seeing behind the curtain, seeing this, seeing that, the biggest summary to this long point that I'm making now is that we're just, we're just cooking someone's dinner at the end of the
Yeah,
day. And it's
yeah,
all the stress and all the worry that you put on yourself and stuff. I'm like, it doesn't need to be this tough,
yeah.
it doesn't need to be this difficult on myself. So I'm like, I think I'm lucky that I found a particular thing that I really, really love, and it brings me a lot of pleasure, a lot of pride. So I'm like, I can just focus on that. I don't need to worry about, oh, I should be getting a Michelin star, or I should be opening a restaurant, or I should be doing this.
Yeah, no, exactly, and that's just you. I think that sums it up very well because I mean, using I don't know if it's a word game, but this industry is a massive pie, and even if your slice of pie looks odd and it's weird, it still fits in there. It
Hmm.
just fits in there because there is so much space for so many different things. And every day the more people I meet, I mean, luckily I work in an institute where there's a culinary institute as well, where young talent comes in every day to learn, and the kind of ideas they come out with, I was
Yeah,
like, wow.
big fan of your work
Yeah,
and
that's
where you
kind of
work, by the
exactly.
way. Big fan.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm lucky to be around so much talent because you see these people come up with ideas and you're like, oh my God, this industry mankind has been eating forever, and nobody thought that this could have been something that has been required, and nobody's thought of it. So, I mean, I would say, yeah, it's a massive pie, and even if your like piece of your pie looks odd and doesn't make sense for anybody, for you it makes sense, and for you that's the way you contribute
Yeah,
to that massive pie of transactions and interactions in the industry. And also what you've said about, I find it very brave, and I think it's about this generation of chefs or people working in this industry who are blatant, unapologetic, and are clear about that the reward for them is not enough and they
mm,
want more. And I think what even for many situations, when you start asking what that more is, you'll realize that more is actually what is standard for any other industry. For us, it is a more
you're
because we're
right.
used to less. So we're
You're
used to so
absolutely
little
right.
that, it's like, oh, we are fighting for, you know what? Or like people celebrating. I've been in restaurants, they're celebrating, oh, we had a 9-hour shift, let's celebrate it. It's like, you shouldn't celebrate that. I mean,
Yeah,
it, I mean that
right.
is that's why were you doing it wrong all this while? Like, great, you
Yeah,
got here, but then don't make it so big that others feel like, okay, these guys are special, they can do it, we can't, because no, everybody
yeah,
should do it at the end of the day.
exactly. I mean, it's a beautiful industry. I honestly,
Yeah.
I really do. I absolutely love hospitality. I think it's such a phenomenal industry. I've got friends for life through it. I've done so many like cool things, but there is the, I think that, the stigma that's attached to it. I don't think it's necessarily ever going to go away, but you know,
Hmm.
but that's kind of beside the point. But like what you were just saying, all of those things, like you're absolutely right, and you're so like almost like indoctrinated, like even if you don't believe it and you've moved past it, you're still sort of like ingrained into, it's almost like severance, you've got an innie and you've got an outie, like nowadays, if I'm talking to a chef or, whatever, and they might just say something completely flippant like, oh yeah, I'm off this weekend, or, or I'm not working next weekend either, something. It doesn't matter, and it's like, good, but it's like a tiny bit where you're like, where you'd almost react like you might have been, a chef 10 years ago, where you'd be like, what do you mean you've got 2 weekends off? You know what I mean? Something like that. But
Yeah.
all the things that you were saying, where you're like, you come to get these things where you're like, oh, yes, I've got this. It's like, well, yeah, you should have had this all along. You know, in fact, we did an event last night at a restaurant. Went really, really well. I was talking to a chef there, and he was really happy with the food. He says it was great. And he said, "Oh, you're going to open a restaurant?" And I just immediately went, "No, no." And he was like, "Really?" And I was like, "No." I was like, "I want to shut the shop at 5, pull the roller shutters down at 5, and I want to be home for 1:30 to see my wife and the cats."
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, it's like not only is there absolutely nothing wrong with me saying that, and it's not, and it's not even so much like, I'm setting a boundary with work, which, I guess I am. It's like, if that's what I want, if that's what I want, and and I can, I can do that. If someone wants to, if someone truly wants to be in a kitchen until 11, 12 o'clock at night, then there's similarly absolutely nothing wrong with that. But that's the bit that probably took the longest to learn is like you're not being selfish or you're not being lazy or whatever for wanting these things. They're just like
Yeah.
set your own
Yeah.
boundaries with yourself as well, you know. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that
Exactly.
up.
No, exactly. For me, when I first, like 2022 is when I first started this job that I do right now. That was my first job outside restaurant, and many months were just kind of feeling wrong, like feeling bad. Why do I have like? I think that's the first time actually. I went into, I think it was a club or a restaurant. I went on a weekend, and it felt weird because I left India when I was 19, and since then I never had holidays because I was always in restaurants. I was undocumented in Spain for a while, so I was always doing odd jobs, but doing something on the weekend always. And the first time I felt, I was like, oh, this feels wrong. There's too many people out there and they're out there because I've only been out on Mondays. So being out on a weekend or seeing or having this evenings free in the beginning felt so wrong. But the idea of this podcast also is that, as you said, I mean, for somebody, creativity can be, you know what, I'm gonna make the restaurant so famous that people from all over the world come there without any salary, even promise of a job, or any kind of like scholarship. They're gonna work for me, and I'm gonna create the dishes that nobody can replicate in the world, or work into science and create a technique nobody can replicate. That is creative, yes. At what cost, I don't know, but isn't it creative that I want to serve decent food, find myself a program where I do a pop up like you did one last night, find something that pays my bills, is connected with food, and can let me be at home at 6. I think that's hell a lot of creative because you're breaking
Well,
so many boundaries. Like how?
exactly. You know, if I'm,
Yeah.
you know, if I'm, you know, if I'm the chef patron of two Michelin star restaurant, you come to my
Yeah.
restaurant and my table's edible, everyone's gonna go, wow, he is so creative. But
Yeah.
you know, behind the scenes, I'm gone
Exactly.
and bags under my eyes and I'm 10 grand in debt, you know.
Uh-huh.
But isn't it just as creative if I make pies all day for example,
Hmm.
my tables are edible, but I'm at
Yeah.
home and I'm also 10 grand in debt, then that is very creative, you know?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I
I'm
think I
not
think
actually 10 grand in debt, actually. I should have said, because when my wife listens to this, she'll be like, why did you say you're 10 grand in debt? I'm absolutely not, Claire, by the way. But yeah, I know what you
no, that's
mean. Like, it's, you know, it's just as creative doing, you
exactly.
know, other
No,
things.
exactly. And as you said, I mean, if somebody likes it, should be in there. So the idea of the podcast is not to say, you know what, all chefs should leave the industry, do something outside restaurants. Restaurants are only for people who want to have a shitty life and not have a salary or have a. I mean, there are people who enjoy it. There are many restaurants I know where you can. I worked in restaurants. You can work Monday to Thursday, have Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off because Pascal Barber believes if somebody wants to eat at my restaurant, they take a holiday and come. I do not open on weekends. So there are many restaurants, there are bars out here in San Sebastian. I mean, I think the Pincho bars in San Sebastian have the best working conditions because the staff over there is all 50-year-old people. So they're not working there because they're young and in the market. They're working there with a good salary. So I think those who want to be there should be in there.
And you don't realize it, do you, you know, when you're young? I mean, and this is, you know, what I say
Yeah.
to, you know, young chefs, you know, there's a young man that's working with me at the minute, Ellis,
Hmm.
who's fantastic.
Hmm.
Everything you're saying and I'm saying, I'm trying to, you know, drill into him. I really wish I understood this when I was like 18, 19. It's got to be one of the most common things. All chefs in the world surely will understand this. One of the things that like pisses you off most is
Hmm.
when you get a new chef in your brigade and they're doing a job or whatever a certain way and it's wrong or it's not the way that you do it, and you tell that to them, and the first thing they say is, "Oh well, we used to do it like this at my last place," or you're doing something and they come over and say, "Oh, we used to do it like this at my last place." Like that annoys every chef, right? You know,
Definitely.
everyone hates that, right? So if we can all agree on that, the expectation of, you know, coming to work 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, whatever, finishing at 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, or working 100-hour weeks, or missing out on birthdays and weddings and seeing your friends, missing out on a social life, you know, not having a lunch break, you know, not watching evening TV, you know, all of these things, they're like, however it was done before, like, who cares? Like, you know what I mean? And I really wish I'd have
Yeah.
understood that when I was younger. You know what I mean? I remember like when I'd like sometimes I'd be working in city centre in Leeds, and sometimes I'd go and meet my friends out. You know, they'd already been out for like 5 hours or whatever, and I'd get out at fucking midnight or whatever. And I'd go
Mm-hmm.
into a bar and I would either smell so strongly of deodorant and aftershave because I'm like masking the smell of me being at
Mm-hmm.
work, like
Mm-hmm.
half a can of deodorant and fucking aftershave or whatever just to mask it, or I'm hyper self-conscious because I smell like a casserole because I've literally just come from work. Do you know what I mean?
Definitely.
And I'm like, why am I, why did I do that? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, why did I do that? And then, you realize it's because I was, literally so desperate to have a social life that I'd,
Yeah.
go out smelling of a stew, you know?
No, it's wild. The things that have happened here. I'm honestly very hopeful because I see a lot of young talent not accepting a lot of things that we I think accepted back then. But coming to work, like going a little behind now, behind your realization of all this has been in phases in different places in different kind of setups. But just tell us a little bit about like your first jobs. Tell about MasterChef. I think a lot of people would be interested to know how was that experience because that's also another part of the industry which a lot of people absorb, even if they don't are not in the industry, they absorb a lot of it. I think it's a worldwide show with a lot of viewers. So that experience and like your first few jobs, what kind of restaurants and why those places, experiences?
What was it called? It was at a pub in a very small town where I went to school called Wetherby. Bit of a weird place is Wetherby. It's a bit. Have you ever seen My Name Is Earl?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, like I think the town he lives in is called like Hickey or something like that. But
Okay.
is that his surname? But anyway, he goes one of the episodes. He goes, "Oh, if you don't leave this town by the time
Mm-hmm.
you're 25 or something, you'll never leave it." Weatherby's
Oh.
very, very, very much like that. Anyway,
Uh-huh.
my best mate at the time, he was a pot washer. He was just washing
Mm-hmm.
dishes there, and I got him to get me a job. And then he was leaving, I think. So I was just like the pot washer. And
Mm-hmm.
this was very much around the time of the F word and stuff, So I was like keen as a badger, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, the grumpy,
Mm-hmm.
vertically challenged, recently divorced, frequent beer drinking head chef that works in the kitchen upstairs. I just like constantly pander him and ask him for jobs, and it had slowly progressed to from, peeling a sack of carrots to I think the most trust I had was making the peppercorn sauce once. Oh no, it was roasting the mushrooms actually, because he was really anal about roasting the mushrooms anyway. But they quite like that, and I used to show up to, I think I used to start work at like 6 o'clock on a Friday, but I'd
Mm-hmm.
finish school at like 3:30,
Mm-hmm.
and I could leave school, get some chicken nuggets, and then walk to the pub, and I'd be there for 4 o'clock. So I was like, I'd just go and start work because I was like, I don't want to
Yeah.
doss around for 2 hours. I'll just work. So they really like that. So I saw that, you're putting in a bit more work and you get a bit more reward
Mm-hmm.
out of it, sort of thing. So I did that, and then I left there, and then I was looking for something else. I think I wanted more money actually. So I applied for a job to be a waiter at a restaurant in Harrogate, which is not far away. And I'm not sure what the like legalities and stuff are. They might have changed a bit now, but very much like at the time you had to be 16.
Okay.
Um, but at the time I was 15, but I really wanted to work and I really wanted to like see an actual restaurant. I just lied and I told them I was 16. I wasn't far off. In order to get paid, I had to like fill out the new starter forms and everything. I had to bring my passport in and stuff like that. And at the time, I only used to work like I think 2 days a week on the weekend. So I used to go to school Monday to Friday, and then I'd do Friday night all day Saturday, and then occasionally on a Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but every time I come to work, my manager Lee would be like, "Oh, have you brought your passport in? Because we need to fill your thing out." And I just kept going, "Oh, Lee, I've forgotten. Oh, I've forgotten." And then he'd go, "Oh, if you don't bring it in next weekend, then you won't get paid until the end of the following month."
Yeah.
Obviously, like if that was now, I'd be like, "Oh God," but I was like 15, so I wasn't like
Yeah.
financially tied to it. So I was like, "Yeah, no worries." And I just kept telling him I'd forgotten, and he kept going, "Oh, for God's sake." Anyway, it got to a point where I was like, I said to my mum, I was like, "I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna have to tell him." So she said, "You're just gonna have to be honest." So I rang him up and I was like, "Lee, I've got something to tell you." And I could sort of like tell in the tone of his voice, he was like, it was almost like he knew, but I owned up to him. But there was something around the way of me, just
Mm-hmm.
fibbing about my age because I really
Mm-hmm.
wanted to work that I think he quite liked. So he was like, we'll keep it our little secret until, you're 16 and that. But it was quite funny because then later on when it was my birthday at work, all of them threw me a 17th birthday party. I was like, and I walked in, I saw the balloons, I was like, there, thank you. Like, trying to play dumb.
Yeah.
But yeah, because when I was younger, I just always like I've just wanted to work. I just really, really wanted to work. And then yeah, I've done all sorts of bits and bobs, really. Going working in like brasseries, fine dining restaurants, worked in pubs, I've opened restaurants. Harewood that you mentioned, that was
Yes.
interesting because that was kind of, I mean, the role that I had would be quite applicable, I guess, to this podcast. So I was like working in a restaurant, but I was doing some events for this like new startup on the side at Harewood. And Harewood's a huge country estate, with a big old English house like Downton Abbey, the film,
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
movies.
Yeah. Yeah. Of
I
course.
think in the first one, but definitely the second one, the filmed part of
Oh,
it there, so that gives you a bit of context as to
wow.
what
Yeah.
it
Of
was
course.
like. Like my boss's dad was like the Queen's cousin or something like that, and he was so many in line to the throne or whatever it was.
Damn.
But we were doing those events, and they were going really well, and they were really interesting. And then I was leaving my full-time job because I was going to go traveling. So I had a one-way ticket booked to Bali, and I was just going to work there. But they offered me a job before I went, so I was like, all right, yeah, okay. So I went away for 3 months and came and did that. And that was really unique because that wasn't, we didn't have a restaurant. That was events, demonstration, development, foraging, research, all that kind of thing. We ended up
Oh, wow.
opening three like cafes, tea rooms. Um, but that job in itself was really unique because we used to do like tasting menus and stuff, but they were like events that would be for like 2 or 3 days, like once every couple of months, say something like that. So that was really interesting, and I sort of, I hate saying it because I'm very imposter syndrome, but like I guess I like made a bit of a name for myself in that
Uh-huh.
role.
Oh.
But sorry, jumping back a bit, yeah, precursor to that was MasterChef. So I did that a few years before.
Before
Um,
Harewood, you did MasterChef.
yeah, so I did that.
Okay.
When did I do it? So I had a very quick timeline. I'd started. I was one of the founders of an ice cream company.
Wow, we didn't. My research
Yeah,
didn't end up there, but wow,
yeah.
that's
So that
crazy.
one, yeah, that one I've like don't really shout about because there was a bit of a bitter end to
Uh
it
huh.
without going into it.
Uh
But
huh.
yeah, I was 19, and
Wow.
yeah, one of the founders of this company. That's good on them. They're doing really, really well now.
Nice.
And then because of that, I then went and opened a cafe, like a brand new cafe with someone. And then yeah, the MasterChef thing came around as a bet. I bet my friend that I was like, you should apply for it, and he was like, no, I'd never get on. And I said, I bet you £20 if you apply, you get on. And he said, I'll do it if you do it. He was applying for the amateurs, and I was applying for the professionals. So I was like, all right, if you get on, I'll give you 20 quid. If I get on, you give me 20 quid. So we were like, all right. So I applied whilst I was sat on the toilet. Um, and I got on and he didn't. And I was like,
No
oh,
way.
yeah. And he said he wouldn't give me the 20 quid unless I went through with it. And I actually went on the show.
Wow.
So I
All for
did it.
20 quid.
Yeah, he never gave me the 20 quid either, upon reflection. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Nice. What a story.
yeah. Um, but yeah, MasterChef was yeah, it was unique. I think it kind of ties into what I was saying at the start about like what you feel like you have to do and what's expected of you and stuff like that. I think a lot of that comes from it. There's a young guy that used to work for me before, and for a lot of years that was his MO. That's all he cared about. Like he's gonna go on MasterChef the professionals. I'm gonna go on. I'm gonna go on it. And I was saying to him like, I was like, honestly, put that like at the back of your mind. I was like, I'm not trying to like crush your dreams or anything, but I was like, it's really honestly, don't put that much gravitas on it. It's really not as that important. I was like, focus on your technique of this, do this, enjoy all this. But yeah, I mean, I was young when I did it. I think I was 19. No, 20, 21, I think, when I did it. So I was really young, really inexperienced, which, was fine. It was a learning
Hmm.
curve. I went through a lot of time where I would just actively avoid talking about it. I mean, to be honest, even now I do
Yeah.
it. I do it every now and then. Not so much
Hmm.
because I think for a lot of the time I was like ashamed of how I did on it, I
Hmm.
guess, maybe. But more so just because I think for a long time, no
Hmm.
matter where I worked or what I did or anything,
Mm.
it was like
Yeah.
MasterChef start or MasterChef
Yeah. Yeah. It's a
semi-finalist was
tag.
either, yeah, it would either be
Yeah.
before or after my name,
Yeah.
and even like years later, like even,
Hmm.
even now, like it'll happen now. I mean, I must have done it like a long time ago now, 21, yeah, but nearly 10 years ago now, and
Hmm.
if it's like if MasterChef is next to my name in
Hmm.
something, that's only because I didn't know the article was going out. Do you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
if someone's interviewing or whatever, I'll say, let's, talking about that. Having said
Hmm.
that, it did do a lot for me. It did create a bit of a profile around me. Um,
Hmm.
I think it might have made getting certain jobs easier, perhaps, because there's probably a bit of marketing that comes along with it.
Hmm.
I got stopped for selfies a few times, which was quite funny. That was
Oh,
quite
that's nice.
that was quite funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite funny telling my friends that had happened and them
Hmm.
not believing me, and then exactly that happening like 10 minutes later. That was quite funny. But
Yeah.
yeah, that was interesting, and that
Hmm.
gave me a bit more insight into TV and food cookery and stuff.
Hmm.
And it was definitely interesting. And I think I learned quite a bit from it. I did make some friends off it, as well, like Ellie, who went to the final, right to the final
Hmm.
that year. I still speak to her. She's great. So that
Hmm.
was that was really cool. But it was intimidating, and it was strange.
Yeah, but definitely, I mean, it shows, right? I mean, you being stopped in the street shows like it has an impact. I mean, of course, there's a lot of negatives around it, and it creates this idea in your in the gu- in the chef that was working for you. But then again, I think it has also opened up to make many terms. I don't know how helpful that is, but I think many terms and kitchen glossary and some awareness household terms. And I think that does
Yeah,
somehow help because you have to explain lesser. But then again, I think you need a
yeah,
very in depth study to understand if it actually impacts. Does MasterChef contribute in making kitchen a more respected job? I think it's a much deeper question, I would say.
yeah. I think it's probably I think it's a deeper question. I mean, I think it's sort of 50-50. I think it definitely glamorizes the
Hmm.
industry a lot. You know,
Hmm.
because the bits that people will see where it's like that looks really hard or that looks really stressful.
Hmm.
That's only within a 1 hour episode, you
Hmm.
know, and it's like it's usually worse than that for
For sure.
12
And that's,
times that 5 days a
yeah.
week or whatever, so it definitely glamorizes it a bit.
Hmm.
But then I think as well, like you were saying, I think it gives a little bit more insight, I guess,
Hmm.
into the industry and what it's like, and also like
Hmm.
just about techniques and and stuff like that. I think the more like cynical and negative chefs would be like, oh, it makes everyone think they're a fucking chef now and they're just a home
Yeah.
cook. But actually,
Yeah.
like, what it is, if there's loads of home cooks that are buying sous vide
Hmm.
machines, or
Hmm.
loads of home cooks have seen, like, if someone goes on MasterChef, right, and they are
Mm-hmm.
cooking with cassava or
Mm-hmm.
hibiscus or jackfruit or sour, something like that, and they do really
Mm-hmm.
well, right? Whatever city this person's watching it in, and they're really mean home cook, the next thing they'll do the next
Mm-hmm.
day is they'll go to the nearest place that can buy those things.
Yeah.
So from where I'm sat, if someone on MasterChef the Professionals smashes it and they've got a dish with plantain and cassava, they're going to go to the market stall in Leeds Market where there's one, maybe two stalls that sell those kind of products, and they're going to get swamped and they're going to sell them. That
Mm-hmm.
brilliant. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That that is
Yeah.
brilliant. And it's same for someone like me. If someone goes on there and they're making a pie, let's say, or they're
Mm-hmm.
making suet pastry from scratch, or they're making hot water pastry from scratch, or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Mm-hmm.
there's thousands of people watching it that are inspired to do so, and then you've all of a sudden got thousands of home cooks that's making hot water pastry. Amazing. You know what I mean? That
Yeah.
is
Yeah. No.
brilliant because those two examples I've just given are like
Mm-hmm.
really large steps away from a frozen ready meal in a supermarket aisle,
Yeah.
for
No. No.
example.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And taking this conversation now, I think that is a good lead to the next section. I want to know from you, like from your last restaurant job. I think it was Kino, if I'm not wrong.
That's
From
right.
that to the current startup, like, I don't know how you call it. What is your correct definition for your business right now?
Uh,
What stage is it at, and why did you get there? Like why
yeah.
pies?
Yeah, so yeah, I get yeah, small business. So I mean, I'm currently what am I like maybe 6 months, 7 months into being
Mm-hmm.
self-employed. But what it came from, so if I jump back a little bit, the
Mm-hmm.
restaurant I was working at just before I started with Harewood, whilst I was there, I came across a guy on Instagram, sorry, called Callum, um,
Okay.
who I mean, I think he was pretty famous at the time. He had like I think he had like fucking 8, 9,000 followers or something like that. But he
Mm-hmm.
was posting the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. Like the most stunning pies and pastry. Like I'd never seen anything like it. And I think probably thinking just now, like I think I'd never really considered. I was saying what I found something that I really love doing. I'd never really considered pies or pastry as that because I genuinely don't think up until that point I'd ever seen anything like it. Like truly, I hadn't. So I really wanted to like learn how to make them because he was making these things called pâté en croûte and I'd never seen them before.
Mm-hmm.
So I was too scared to message him directly in case he said no or he
Mm-hmm.
just left me on red. So what I did was, and this kind of goes back to the story of how I got that job in the restaurant when I lied about my age. He
Uh-huh.
was working at this big fancy hotel as the exec chef. So I phoned the restaurant and I told them that I was from the Michelin Guide,
Mm-hmm. No.
um, and I needed to talk to the executive chef as soon as
Uh-huh.
possible. So could I have his email address?
Uh-huh.
And I think I'd just called the front desk of the restaurant, and I don't know if it was someone experienced or someone like, pretty new, but they gave me
Yeah.
his email address. So I was like, thank you very much. Hopefully I'll be seeing you very soon. Something like that. So I got his email address and I emailed him and I explained what I'd done and then said, I'll come clean and all this. And I was like, I really want to learn how to make pâté en croûte.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if there's any way you could do me a masterclass, like if I paid you and all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And he got back to me like the next day. I've got like a screenshot of the email somewhere, and
Right.
he was just like, I think he was laughing about it or something, but he was like, absolutely, he was like, the more chefs trying to nail pâté en croûte, the better. I was like, I kept trying to pay him, and he wouldn't let me.
Nice.
So I got the train to London the day after a staff party and stayed in London for a couple of days and yeah, went and spent a full day with him making pâté en croûte. And then I went for dinner there the same night and he gave me this big meal, for free and everything. And it was
Mm-hmm.
just like transformative, it was amazing. And it was like that was it then. That like it was in like pies and pastry, like it was in. And I
Right.
just, because I wasn't in a restaurant, I guess I was quite fortunate in that, like, I kept, and it, because then when I went on to Harewood, I had a lot of
Mm-hmm.
free time, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So, or I say free time when I should have been like, developing something useful. I'd be developing, making pâté en croûtes and stuff over and
Yeah.
over just because I absolutely loved them, and I used to put them on
Nice.
event menus and things like that. No one really like knew what they were, but I just kept doing them anyway. Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is arrogant for me to say, but I'm fairly sure, like, or at least to my knowledge, like, I think I was probably the only person in Leeds making pâté en croûte
Wow.
for years. Just because, like, not at that point, not really anyone
Mm-hmm.
ever like anywhere was making them. So I just
Mm-hmm.
kept making them, and it was, for a long time I was just obsessed with pâté en croûte, and then Harewood, working there, da 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 da. And then I left there because I needed a new challenge. Opened a restaurant in Harrogate for someone and some friends, and that was really difficult, and that closed. And I remember there was like a little whisper of one of the chefs saying, "Oh, I'd love you to put one on. I'd love to see one. I've never eaten one." And then they were never mentioned. And then me and my sous chef from there, we went and got another job elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that was shit, and that ended. And then we both went to another job together that was
Mm-hmm.
like, it wasn't like it was a bad job, like it paid us really well. They had a really good kitchen, but like I think the company that owned it had like pissed off a lot of the locals. So like
Okay.
we were in this weird place where like we had loads of expensive equipment in a new kitchen, really beautifully
Mm-hmm.
decorated place. The business was dead, like
Mm.
because it was a pub. Apart from Sundays, it was so quiet, but they had enough money to just like keep it going. Like they were really,
Okay.
really wealthy. But what that meant was we had a lot of free time because we were the only two chefs and we were open 6 days a week, so we
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of free time. And then I think we got given a load of pheasants one day, um, and we needed something to do with them, and I was like, oh, I'll make some pot pies out of them. And it was almost like I mean, I've never done it, but like I can almost liken it to, if someone was like a really bad drug addict for years, and then they went sober, and then
Mm.
they just tried a bit again. It was like that, when I made those pheasant
Yeah.
pies, it was like it just clicked and it was just like it just illuminated and I was just like, fuck, why haven't I been doing this for the past
Mm-hmm.
however long?
Yeah.
So I was just making a ridiculous amount of pies.
Mm-hmm.
Especially owning my own business now, like I know, like I waste so much fucking money, honestly. Like I was spending the
Mm-hmm.
company's money, I was spending my own money, just making so many pies, like over and over and over again, like, really developing it and, it's really practicing and working on it, because I remember one of my best mates was like, you might as well do all your development on someone else's budget rather than your own. I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, good point. So I just kept doing it over and over and over again. We both knew we weren't going to be at that job for long. But previous to that, we were like trying to write a business plan to open up a business together, and we were going to open a sandwich shop,
Okay.
and we were thinking of like names and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the guys that we were gonna ask to invest in us, we know that he really likes like hip hop music,
Mm-hmm.
so he really likes Grey Poupon mustard.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I just like ADHD went on a rabbit hole with that, and I stumbled across an old advert for Grey Poupon from like
Mm-hmm.
1981, and at the end of it, it goes Grey Poupon. It's about the finer pleasures in life, and I was like, oh, fuck, there it is, there it is. So I was like, right, that's what it is. And
Yeah.
like 2 days later, I went on Company's House and I bought the name. I was like, nobody's having that. I'm having that. And I was like, right, I want to open it. We'll do that. Do that. That didn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
But then jumping back to the place where I was making loads of pies, yeah, I was just working with him one day. It just clicked. I was like, I should open a pie shop. I'll open a
Mm-hmm.
pie shop and I'll call it Finer Pleasures. Oh my God. So I sort of was like, right, that's what I'm got buried in my mind. But I was like, I don't know when that's going to happen. I don't have any money. I'm terrible with money. I don't know if and when that can happen. So I looked for my next job, and that's where Kino came
Mm-hmm.
because it seemed like a good opportunity and it seemed like a logical step for me at the time. And for one reason or another, like not me, but the business was, the business was, struggling, but we did some amazing things and, worked with, did some stuff with some like
Mm.
really amazing chefs and writers and stuff. But you know, good things come to an end, and like, I'd been doing the pies for so long at my last job, and then I brought them along to at Kino and doing loads of them there. Started doing this event for all centered around pies, and sort of everyone sort of kind of knew me for that by then. So when it came to the end of working at Kino and I was looking for another job, it came to a point where I was like, I need to sort of make a call here. Because I was like, because at that point because this was November just gone. In February, I had my honeymoon, and then I had a couple of other bits on. So I was like, if I take a full-time job now, I'm going to have to book off, a week and a half at Christmas. I'm going to have to take some time off in
Mm.
January, and then I'm going to have to take 3 weeks off in February. And I'm like, no one's going to want to hire me for that. And also, like, I don't know if I want to put that on someone,
Yeah.
and just talking to a few friends and stuff, they were like, you've been on about doing it for long enough. A lot of things had fallen into place, like literally just before I left Kino, someone had messaged me wanting to buy a load of mince pies, and someone had hired me to do this and do that. So a lot of things sort of aligned at the same time, and I was like, this seems like it seems like the wrong decision would to be to not do it, you know,
Hmm.
if you know what I mean. So I was like, I'm just gonna give it a go and see what
Wow.
happens, you know.
Timing, huh?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. I mean, I'm one of those that'll put a lot of it down to
Yeah.
luck and timing, but
Yeah.
my wife, God bless her, will frequently remind me that it's hard work and and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, the process you've explained has been a lot of like finding that niche of pâté au crew and then perfecting those skills. I mean, pâté au crew pies are not very far from each other when it comes about its fillings and crusts at the end of the day. And,
yeah.
and that's what it
I
is.
mean, a Frenchman will tell you that a pâté en croûte is not a pork pie, and an old Yorkshire butcher will tell you that a pork pie is not a pâté en croûte, and they'll both say that they're nowhere near each other. I'm here to tell you that they're basically the same thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And now, like for me to wrap this up, what I would like to know from you is now, I mean, now you run Finer Pleasures. First of all, congratulations. It's a young
Thank you.
business. I saw some things. They look really nice, really, really interesting. The business looks good. The pies look good. And yeah, your journey of like finding this time and being brave enough to make that plunge. I don't know how many people could, start a business of their own into something which is yeah so big in where you come from, and such a everybody could say, my mother makes the best pie, and then you plunge into that sort of a niche business. So from you, what I would like to know now is that based on the whole career that you've told us now, the kind of restaurants you worked at, the kind of starting from the pot wash to restaurants to MasterChef to working for a country club, things like this, doing events. How does that experience now tie into your current business? How much do you think on your day-to-day business today? Because the business side of things, how much of it are you basing off what you learned in those years?
Mm.
And the second would be, how much time do you find now? Do you think, like, because we spoke about mental health before, you brushed off that in the beginning. The second part of this question would be, does business and the kind of business you do right now give you more room to give time to subject like mental health or taking care of
Mm.
you, yourself, those around you, those working for you, those working with you? How does these two things work for you?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, well, there's. I'll start with the second question, but
Uh-huh.
with
For sure.
around mental health, I've definitely like, it's afforded me more time to think about my mental health and, concentrate on it more. I'm learning that running my own business means that, my mental health, it's a bit more like of a minefield now because I've got a lot more
Mhm.
things to think about. But, there was a lot of points like in throughout my career where there were big red flags around my mental
Mhm.
health that I should have taken more notice of, but I didn't. Um, and they progressively, got worse without me realizing. There was a point at Harewood where I was, I had, I'm not sure if it was like a breakdown or panic attack, or I think I might have been like
Mhm.
chronically burnt out. But I was like, I was signed off work for a week, and I I went to therapy,
Mm-hmm.
and that was, that was really tricky. And I mean, most would think that that'd be an obvious red flag, but I don't think it was so much, to me, and
Mm-hmm.
it was like affecting my work and it was affecting my relationship, which I think, which was the hardest thing, because at that point it was sort of ticking towards, the final stretch of me working at Harewood, so I was, it's more difficult how much it affected my relationship. Um, and then I'd carry on going to therapy, the same therapist every now and then, like way after I left Harewood. The restaurant I went to after Harewood, that was really tricky. That was really tricky. And that took a huge impact on my mental health. My
Mm-hmm.
mental health, my physical health. It took a toll on my relationship. And whilst I was going to therapy, I think prior to that, my therapist had mentioned, like, have you ever thought about, or have you ever thought about that you might have ADHD or autism or,
Mm-hmm.
something like that, and I think my partner had mentioned it once before, and I was like, no. And I paid a lot of money to go see a psychiatrist and stuff and went down this long process. And I ended up
Mm-hmm.
getting diagnosed with ADHD,
Mm-hmm.
and then I was like, right, okay. Couldn't really get anything for it. Like there was no like solution at the time and stuff. But yeah, carried on, and that relationship, that restaurant had a big impact on my mental health, my relationship and stuff. And it got to a point where I think the restaurant after that, like as my mental health was getting worse because of how much strain my profession and work was putting on me, my drinking was getting worse, and
Mm-hmm.
then as my drinking was getting worse, my behavior whilst I was drinking was getting a lot worse. So it got to a point where it was one or the other. So I ended up quitting drinking cold turkey, because I
Mm-hmm.
was like, that was a big turning point because that was a big point where I was
Yeah.
like, I need to do something for my mental health. Otherwise, everything else is going to go tits up. And that was really transformative. That was really, really, really good. And I think because of me doing that, it's then a lot of things that I've done since then has been able to happen because I've put that focus on my mental health. Like my only regret about those decisions was that I didn't do them fucking 5 years previous.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and a lot of things just got better. My relationship, like my actual work, like the actual things I was producing was getting better and things like that. And then because work was going better, I could like focus on my mental health more. And then I actually ended up getting medicated for ADHD, which was really good and really beneficial for me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think a combination of all of those things is what meant I was able to actually think, you know what, I'm gonna give starting my business a go because I'm very bad with imposter syndrome and I don't think that'll ever go
Mm-hmm.
away. But you know, it wasn't until like, maybe halfway through last year that I could actually entertain the idea of me doing it. And I think when what happened at Kino happened, it was that kick up the arse that like made me do it because I don't if it wasn't for that I don't think I'd have ever actually done it. But
Yeah.
yeah, now I've got my own business, I can sort of be more mindful and I can actually like do self-care. Like today for example, I had an event last night and I was going to go and do this today and do this, but I was like, no, actually no, I'm not. I'm just gonna
Mm-hmm.
stay at home today and like fiddle with the website, and just you know what I mean. And
Nice.
that's what's really important. And it's one of those where I'm like, I really wish I'd have known that when I was
Yeah.
younger, you know.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
process. I mean, at the end, it's you don't learn these things overnight, and it's a process. And what the idea of the podcast is to, for if somebody can use this conversation of ours as an inspiration to understand that they're not alone or this is not very unique, because many a times you feel somehow your problem is not even a problem because you see so many around you with the same problem. You're like, okay, that must be the normal, because how you said that you didn't have that wake up call for a long time is because
yeah,
even if you have like big wake up calls, you're like, okay, yeah, but I've heard so many stories of everybody around me having that. It must be normal.
yeah, and it's also hard for, I think, sort of suppressing how you're feeling about certain things, I think is another thing
Hmm.
that's difficult with our industry because, when we were talking earlier about, all the things you get and you're like, oh, brilliant, but you're like, oh no, you should have had that anyway. But you're like, I shouldn't feel like that. It's like in the industry, like a common thing is like, when you feel like shit or whatever, I'm sure you have. I've heard it a million times. It'll be like, someone's always got it worse. Someone's
Yeah.
always worse off. And it's like, that is true. That is
Hmm.
true. But that statement is only applicable in certain things. If you like smash your like a really expensive vase you've got at home, yeah, it sucks, but someone's got it worse. But actually, if you're
Hmm.
like towing the line of burnout or you're really struggling
Hmm.
at work, yes,
Hmm.
someone may have it worse in certain scenarios, but that's like marginalizing your own feelings, and then
Hmm.
that's when if you start saying to yourself someone's got it worse, eventually you're going to be what someone else is saying. When they're
Yeah.
saying to someone else, someone's got it worse, they're on about you. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
somebody's got to break the circle, somebody's got to break the loop. If not, you'll be the one telling the next person, I
Yeah.
had it worse, so, go through this. So, yeah, brave of you. First of all, congratulations for breaking the loop and getting here. And also, like how you said, because I was going to quite like turn this question more into that now that you have a business, it's giving you space for this. But I loved how you answered that actually getting the business has been because you could see yourself having somebody, like as you said, with the imposter syndrome. It's somebody with that. I can imagine how it can be to then have your own brand and then have to do the marketing for the brand and then be the face of the brand and then be the name behind the pies. So I think for you having started this process much earlier, it permitted you to take this leap. If you could just tell us a little about how not just the mental health thing, how it transitioned into your current business, but also the skills that you learned,
Yeah.
like the pie skills you've told us. I mean, the pie skills, we know that they came through all these free times in the restaurants, but what about like management skills or managing people or the business side
Yeah.
of running a business?
Yeah. So I think that. So I mean, firstly, like the food side of it, the product
Hmm.
side of it, when like the bricks and mortar shop opens, what again, this is the like imposter syndrome thing kicking in here, but like I think what like
Yeah.
will separates me and separates my product is that all the pies I make, I sort of approach them with that chef brain
Hmm.
and that like
Hmm.
chef way of thinking, and how chefs like put a dish together, and all of the things that I've sort of collected over the years, even all the way back to
Hmm.
like that young chef that's like obsessed with the Rocker brothers and fucking
Yeah.
Renee and Daniel Hugh and all of that, but applying that to a steak and ale pie, that's very
Hmm.
much different, and how I approach a pork pie, you know you could buy 10 pork pies in Leeds, but they're all kind of like pretty similar. But the little
Mm.
things you learn as a chef is what separates you. Much like you were saying with what you do, and when chefs work
Hmm.
in development for say a supermarket. I don't know if you know the supermarket chain Waitrose at
Yeah,
all.
of course, Waitrose and
Yeah,
Partners. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So like, like they had Heston with them for a long time, but then I
Yeah.
think, I don't
Hmm.
know, maybe after they ended that, like in the last 4 or 5 years or so, they've got, a dedicated team of development chefs.
Hmm.
So when you go there
Hmm.
now, some of the products that they've got on the shelves are fantastic. And that's because
Yeah.
they've got a chef's way of thinking to it, and
Hmm.
all these different products, and like, you go in now and you're like, oh, that's actually really useful for that. And it's because there's a chef behind it. So I think that's what makes it unique in a chef's brain. But then in terms of like the management side of it, like at the minute I'm one of one employees, but when
Hmm.
when I eventually do start taking on staff, going, it's just what I only want people to work like as much as I would want to work, if I was in
Hmm.
their positions, and I think I can't remember who said it, but like whoever's working for me, you know,
Hmm.
they can work,
Yeah.
they work 10% less than me, and that's only because I've got the responsibility of,
Of
paying
course.
them and things like that.
Hmm.
But it very much is you hear all the big chefs in the world say, like, oh, I couldn't do it without the team, and they're the most important
Mm.
ones. But most of the time, they're the ones that are doing all the hard work, and they're the ones that
Yeah.
might be, exploited ever so slightly. But,
Mm.
you know, realistically, like if I open a pie shop, like I can only do that with a team. Like
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
cannot do that on my own. All I've done my whole life is like put into like so much work on myself. So I need to
Hmm.
recognize that I have to delegate, and there's no way around me doing that. I'm really looking forward to taking on staff. I'm
Hmm.
hoping that the first member of staff that I take on is a young lad called Ellis, who's going to come on
No.
as an apprentice with me at Kino. So all the sort of
Hmm.
things that I've been telling you for the past, hour or so or whatever, I'm
Yeah.
sort of putting on to putting onto him. And
Hmm.
I would love to hire chefs in the pie shop
Hmm.
because I would love chefs to be love what they're making and really have a craft that they can really, really focus on. But then
Hmm.
I would also really like them to walk out the door at 5:30 to go and see the
Yeah.
girlfriend, boyfriend, friends, dog, whatever. Do you know what I mean? I'd love that, you know.
No,
So
that's a great vision. I mean, the position, what you're speaking about, like, yeah, firstly, getting to mentor talent like this, getting to create these conditions, and that's what I said. Also, again, going back to MasterChef, what we said is MasterChef creates this kind of habitual cooking or like making cooking a daily thing, but also gives people like you a platform. Like, I do not know if we would be having this conversation if there was not that article which mentioned, yeah, Josh was on MasterChef. So that's where also like the platform it's given you, the platform you've built for yourself, and then coming and then transitioning that into a business where you can create opportunities for people. I think that's a great vision. And what you said about chefs being a part of not just restaurant food but consumer goods, that's a massive change, and that's I see being demanded every day more by the clients I work for, because they realize that going down the route they went, for example, with alternative proteins, of making all these meat replacements with just food technologists who can mimic texture, can mimic the juiciness and tenderness, but in the end, if they do not think like a chef, and if the flavor is not the center of things, or the approach is not how chefs are, I mean, unfortunately, it's not a documented process. It's very personal. It's very unique. But I think there is something about it which which sets us apart as professionals of this
yeah,
field. You know.
I agree. I think it's, at the risk of sounding too romantic, when
Hmm.
someone says like, you can taste the love in it. I think that very much is, that very much is the case, like
Hmm.
not even down so much to like synthetic flavors or anything like that. You can sort of like taste when something is, handcrafted or whatever. I can't
Yeah.
remember who it might have been Bourdain that says, you can sort of like, it's like what's the term for it? It's like a taste that comes from a certain person's hands. Do you know what I
Uh huh.
mean? Like, you could
That
have
sounds very Bourdain.
three people making the same thing, same recipes
Yeah.
to the T, everything's identical, but it tastes slightly different because it's that flavor, and I think just like dipping back into the mental health thing, it's like, I mean, my scenario, and I'm sure your scenario is a bit different because we
Hmm.
do it all the time anyway. But
Hmm.
if I'm not cooking at work, I'm cooking at home, and that's because
Yeah.
I love cooking for my wife,
Hmm.
so I'm cooking at home a lot. But also, I think just like, if you're not in our industry, like, I would say that cooking is a really good medium for mental
Hmm.
health, like being
Definitely.
really mindful, like I can't practice mindfulness. I've tried it a million times, but like I say, I'm
Hmm.
ADHD, so it's very much not in my
Yeah.
wheelhouse. But if I could, cooking would very much be a way, and that's why I think cooking's such a powerful thing.
Yeah, no, it's a great medium. I think that's a beautiful note for me. The what you've said at the end now, I think I would like to wrap it up here. It's crazy and amazing the amount of different ways how firstly people end up in this industry, how different everybody's journey entering it, and how different everybody's journey leaving it is. But in the end, still, irrespective of all these variations of it, there is still like a single thread which could tie us together, and still we somehow find our own niche into this, yeah, the food business, and yeah, the one you found with Finer Pleasure in the pie industry. I think it's a great one. So I think if you could just, yeah, give some closing remarks on any advice you would give to people who would be in situations where they do not know if kitchen is their calling, they entered it because it seemed like the profession they want to be in, and now they're like, okay, what else can I do if I want to have my evenings free, or if I want to have a life which is not the typical restaurant industry life? What would be your advice to a person like that?
I think if you're in a restaurant and you're not sure if it's for you anymore, don't be
Hmm.
ashamed to like just take a step back. Like I think that's what I wish I'd have done. There's no
Hmm.
shame in not even so much take it. I think the word demotion is a bit of a dirty word, but there's no wrong
Hmm.
with it. Maybe take on a bit less responsibility and just, try and reflect on think about the things that really excite you. Also, there's no
Hmm.
pressure, there's no time limit to like figure out what it is that you need to do. And if it turns out that working in restaurants and even working in food for that matter isn't your thing, that's
Hmm.
absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine. But the good ones to me is programs like Anthony Bourdain or Dave Chang or MasterChef or whatever. What are
Hmm.
the episodes that you've seen? What are the ones that you'd rewatch? Like, what are the
Hmm.
first ones that you'd rewatch? And what
Hmm.
is it about that? If it's Dave Chang talking about pizza,
Hmm.
hypothesize about you really wanting to get into
Hmm.
pizza. If it's Dave Zilber talking about growing
Hmm.
koji in Denmark,
Hmm.
maybe consider that could be an avenue, you know.
Hmm.
There's no pressure, but yeah, I hate to say it, but maybe think outside the box of a restaurant
Yeah.
because they're not the be all and end all of it.
Hmm. Yeah. Couldn't be a better way to close this. Could be a better answer. It's not about what you're doing. It's about how you're doing and where you're doing it. And maybe just those two factors changing could
Yeah,
still let you keep what you're doing, but in a
exactly.
different,
I think it's
different
not
way.
so much what you're doing, it's how you
Hmm.
feel when you're doing it.
Hmm.
you know? And I
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
ace when I'm making pies. So,
Hmm. Perfect. It's been a pleasure, Josh. Again, thank you very much for joining this. Yeah, a great pleasure hearing your story, and I bet all that you've said here is going to inspire a lot of people and
hope
and
so.
and take this journey forward. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thanks very much for having me. Yes, but an honour, and it's been my, well, fine pleasure.
Fine, a pleasure it is.